Good afternoon, everyone. This is Chris Riley with System Source. Thank you so much for choosing to spend this lunch hour with Dave Ferg and I. Dave is one of our senior consultants and also pre-sales engineers. And so we have a lot of good information coming up for you today as we kind of talk about helping you kind of understand, evaluate, be able to kind of tease out the differences between and what direction you should take between going to cloud, Azure cloud, staying on premise, doing some of both. So there's lots of things that go into that. We have lots of people in the hybrid world. So people don't tend to do this in a big bang sort of thing, which is, today I'm all on-prem and tomorrow I'm all in Azure. It tends to be a process for many people. So hybrid's a very common place to be. So if that's where you are. You have lots of good company, but you'll learn lots today that will help you as you kind of may choose to grow that Azure presence. Or if you're all on-prem and you're looking at what makes sense, one more time of on-prem or moving to cloud, you've got lots of good information ahead of you. So looking at the agenda a little bit. So Dave's going to be going through kind of a top 10 decision criteria for kind of understanding, the decisions between Azure Cloud, Azure, staying on-prem, hybrid. He'll be looking at things like security, reliability, manageability, fault tolerance, going through all those things as we go through the agenda. We'll also look at kind of a flexibility for as you look ahead for new requirements. How do you kind of meet those? We'll look at readiness, and then the ever popular one we'll look at cost as well. And then at the end, we'll have Q&A, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. All right. Hopefully, you've got a pizza in front of you. If you don't, just note Julie Dellinger's email address on the screen. She can help you with all things pizza. So if you'd ordered one, you'd ask for one and it's not there yet, be patient for a few minutes and maybe trying to find your office, find your floor, find your home if you work from home. But if not, just reach out to Julie, please. All right, during the webinar today, the audio is in presentation mode, so you can hear Dave and I, but we can't hear you. But that's done for a good reason, not because we don't want to hear you, but we want to try to make sure that any noise, music on hold, any of those kinds of things that a participant may have don't come through the whole group. However, you can reach me at any point during the webinar just through typing into the chat tab and go to webinar. And I mentioned Q&A. Type those questions into the questions tab and go to webinar. Whenever you think of them, we'll save them up, and then I'll read those out to Dave at the end so he can take care of your questions. You'll get this presentation and also a link to the recording of it later on today, so you don't have to write furiously. And finally, we'll send you out just a little survey after the end of this. You can let us know how we did, what questions that, or additional resources that you might need, as well as some things that may be additional resources, and I'll just kind of share those towards the end, make more sense then, and you can just kind of ask for those, and we'll try to help you as you go down that evaluation path. And we try to make it more fun by pulling one of the completed surveys out for Amazon $50 gift card, so hopefully that'll be you. All right, a little bit about System Source. We do have a large group today, so we want to say welcome to all of our longtime System Source friends as well as our newcomers. So glad you're here, and hopefully you'll learn a lot in this educational session. So System Source, we've been around since 1981, and we work with IT professionals throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. So a lot of times people come to us when they need to acquire new technology. So while we do end-user computing work, most of our work is happening in the data center, and whether that's traditional on-prem or in cloud variants like Azure or in AWS or in all the other kinds of places that you could put data center related resources like storage, servers, firewalls, etc. Those could be in hosting facilities, colo facilities, could be in a variety of places. And your data can live across all these places, and that's very common now. So we help folks kind of design, implement, secure, troubleshoot data center related technologies, including things like wireless and virtualization, all of those types of things. But people acquire because they're really trying to improve. So we talked a little bit about cloud service and consulting, but a lot of folks are improving by training, and we offer about 600 plus courses, all available remotely. and that's on several dozens of topics, including Microsoft and cloud and security and Cisco and all those other types of both manufacturer-specific certification path kinds of technical training, as well as broader base types of courses all through our Learning Center. I'll present as professional AV, digital signage, all the Teams rooms, Zoom rooms, WebEx rooms, so all those large monitors, cameras, microphone systems, all are taken care of by our presentation systems group. And finally, we maintain all these things, either on a you call us when things go bump in the day or bump in the night on a reactive basis, and that's under service and support. Whether you have a service agreement or not with us, you can reach us both obviously during the day, but after hours, just follow the voice prompts after hours if things go bump in the night, as well as managed services where we are the IT department for dozens of organizations in this area. All right, we've got several upcoming webinars similar to this one. So we have one that's going to come up on Microsoft licensing next week. That's always a hot topic for everybody because it's so difficult to understand and stay up to date on. So we'll try to help you get ready for your next renewal with information through that. We'll talk about building that high-performing Wi-Fi network or improving what you have on the 6th. We'll talk about remote IT management, a tool that we finally like called Ninja. That's coming up on the 18th. Then particularly for finance and insurance firms, we're going to drill down into the Verizon report that looks at actual security events and look at ones that are specifically kind of targeted towards those industries, finance and insurance in this case. And then kind of a quickie on the 20th, which is we call it top 5 in 10 minutes. It's actually, it will take maybe a little bit longer, but looking at all the camera systems, particularly all the AI types of camera systems that are transforming the video calls that you and I live on all the time. So when you get this presentation, all of these titles are links. You can go right to register. I'll also drop them into the chat while the presentation is going on. And with that, off to Dave we go.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you all for joining us this lunch hour. I hope we were able to provide some value to you today. So what we're going to be talking about, as you saw in the title slide, is the decisions you want to make, what things you want to consider, whether I'm going to stay on-prem, whether I want to move to the cloud, whether I want to be in a hybrid environment. So our first task is to start looking at what I wanted to present was that these top 10, if you will, just a kind of a catchy way of saying that, a top 10 decision criteria that you're going to want to use when considering, do I go to the cloud? Do I move some of my things to the cloud? Do I stay on-prem? How do I evaluate that? So let's start by talking about total cost of ownership. And this is a bit of a tricky one. So I'm just going to kind of give some ideas. I'm not going to give any formulas, if you will, because a lot of determining this is very specific to what you have in your environment now. But basically, when you're moving from cloud, from on-prem to cloud, you're typically moving from capital expenditures for your on-prem equipment. So you want to kind of know what that is, and not just the direct cost of your equipment, but the indirect cost of being on-prem, which would be your heating and cooling and the geography of your data center and things like that. The web links or the WAN connections that you may have to support these connections. So all of that needs to be factored in, plus the support staff to maintain the room, if you will. So all of those things need to be considered in to understand what your true total cost of ownership is. If you move up to the cloud, there are different ways that you can pay that will change the cost of ownership to you. The first one and the default, if you will, is to pay as you go. You subscribe to a resource, let's just say virtual machine for discussion's sake, and you're going to have a monthly payment that you're going to pay for that machine as long as it is on. So if you power it down, it will not be charged. You will not be charged for anything. You would be charged for the disk space you're continuing to use, but not for the compute power. So that's pay as you go. And that will have a cost associated with it. So, and typically the higher of the costs So if you want to know what your up top, what your high bar is going to be, look at your pay-as-you-go costs. If you're going to be committing to the cloud for a while, there are some prepay models, things like reserved instances, where you are reserving a machine, a virtual machine, to be available and running, at 1 to 3 year timeframes. You're going to pay for it, and this machine will be there and rerunning for you. And Microsoft will give you a discount because you've upfront reserved this instance. If the thing with reserved instances, though, it's the machine, it's that VM that is actually running in a particular region and data center. If you need a little more flexibility, there are savings plans that you can use that you are committing to a spend, but then you can take that spend and put this VM in region US East, or maybe now you want to have that spun down in US East and brought up in West, etc. But as long as the spend commitment is there, Microsoft will give you a discount. There is a prepay. Now that, by the way, that savings plan is for compute. There's a prepay option that's part of your EA agreements that is similar to the savings plan, except it can handle compute, storage, networking, etc. So if you know you're going to have known compute coming up, you can save some money by prepaying. And the best savings you're going to get are called spot instances, but they're not for all circumstances. This is where if there is unused Azure capacity, your machine can come up and run, and if it isn't, it can shut down. So that's best for interruptible workloads. So if you're trying to figure out what the cloud is going to cost, part of that equation is going to be, well, how are you going to pay for it? Not only what resources, we haven't gotten there yet, but how am I going to pay for it? Another one you want to consider is the scalability and flexibility of the network and what you need in your business, whether you have regional concerns or national concerns or international concerns. And that's where the Azure platform, who has 70 regions across 36 countries, in 163 locations. Some of those have more than one data center per location. So the Azure cloud moves you into a compute area where you have more geography than you probably have on-prem now. So I can now quickly, as a small business, not just have my data center here in the Baltimore area, but I can now have a replication out in the West Coast easily without having to acquire hardware and things like that. I can just put resources out there. So I have that flexibility and the ability to scale to location, so I can have my resources within and or across regions. I can also quickly scale up and scale down as needed. You can either do that manually, or there's some dynamic methods you can do that with things like scale sets, which is a collection of servers that will come online or go offline depending on the demand for an application. Think of a web app that's going to need multiple front-end servers at the peak, but fewer in off hours. The scale set will come up and spin up the servers as needed and spin them down, saving you money and, when they're not needed. Adding capacity is almost a click, almost, but it is much simpler because, again, you are not having to acquire equipment, you're not having to implement equipment, you're just asking to use storage, whatever, at the moment. So your flexibility to respond quickly to a business need and to scale up, scale down, or move your location is far better in the cloud. So if your business requires these scalabilities and flexibilities for this faster paced world we're living in, cloud may be a decision you might want to go to. So Azure Arc is I'm putting that as part of flexibility, because it's allowing us to say, I want to move to the cloud, but I'm still having some on-premise equipment, but I want to manage it in one place. So what Azure Arc lets us do and gives us the flexibility of continuing to have on-prem services, but keeping my management more simple by having a object created up in Azure that represents my on-prem resource, so that I can make changes, I can see telemetry information, etc. And if I want to make changes, I modify the Azure object. It talks to the resource manager, which talks to the on-prem world, which could be VMware, Hyper-V, Azure Local, other clouds, and resources can be modified. So now I have the flexibility of having resources in multiple locations and a single area from which to manage them. Azure Local. Azure Local is an interesting service because it's an on-premises compute with, well, it has compute, storage, and networking all in one. So it is an on-premises environment, but it is considered an Azure resource. So when I build an Azure Local environment, I'm going to have a hypervisor base to it, operating system, but from Azure itself, I can now create a virtual machine that happens to live in this Azure location, which happens to be my local location. So I'm in the cloud for management, and I may have VMs in the cloud, but I also may have VMs on premises. So I can use Azure Migrate tool, for example, to migrate an on-premises server to an on-premises VM within Azure Local, because that will look like to Azure and on-premises to cloud migration. To support this, many vendors have hardware for this that would be validated nodes that are validated to work with this solution, or they can offer integrated systems. For example, if you go up to the HP site, you can, and you look for Azure Local systems, it will show you options for integrated systems that they offer. Now, integrated systems are your hyper-converged worlds, if you want to consider it that way. It has compute, storage, and networking, one bundle. There's your on-premises world. Or if you want to keep a more disintegrated world, you have your own compute, your own storage, and networking. You can get validated nodes that work with Azure Local. Why would you want to use a product like this or keep anything on local? Well, as most of you may be aware, there are scenarios where you need the data to stay there, not just for performance, but possibly for requirements of data being near wherever it's working. Think retail store potentially. You want them to be able to work if their connection goes down. So you may need their apps and their services and all that running local, just in case they have to go online because of a disruption of some sort. So that's where the Azure Local comes into play. And it gives you, so the flexibility you're gaining here is to be able to put your resources anywhere that may not even, think of it as another Azure location. You know, so if there's not an Azure data center where you are that's close enough, you can keep it Azure Local. It also allows you to scale, if you will, in that you're moving, you're adding your own hardware into this mix of how you're scaling things. So that's what the Azure Local offers you to do. If you want to keep something local still, there's also, and I just wanted to kind of sidebar into this for a little bit, HPE offers something called the Private Cloud Edition, which is a close cousin of the Azure Local solution. Now, Dennis, one of our other consultants, did a webinar on this back in September. If you want more information, I've just borrowed a couple of his slides to let you know that this product exists. And it may be very helpful for you if you have an existing Hyper-V or VMware world that you want to continue to manage, or if you want to get off of VMware because of the pricing issues that have been popular in conversation, and you want another hypervisor solution. This is where the Private Cloud Edition comes into play. This is a cloud managed, much like Azure Local's cloud managed, world of compute, storage, and networking. Now, the interesting part of this, and you'll see it more in another slide, is the operating system for that hypervisor can be HPE's, it can be VMware, it can be other hypervisors as well in there. So we can bring this in a hyper-converged option of just here's some new hardware. You can bring it into an existing area utilizing the existing VMware world you have. And as we'll see in a minute, you can have both the VMware world and the HPE hypervisor running at the same time on different nodes and still be able to manage them. So you're managing from the cloud, you're managing on-premises resources. If you want, these solutions, again, they can be disintegrated, which means you have your own separate compute, storage, and networking, or you can have all in one. If you've heard of the HPE Simplicity project and product, that's the kinds of things you're looking for here that you're going to be managing from the cloud. All right. You're going to get the copy of the slide, so I'm going to just go by this one right now. This is just kind of here's what the component is and here's what it does. I'll let you read that for yourselves. What I wanted to point out that where this becomes an advantage for you is, as like I mentioned earlier, you can do this using HPE's hypervisor, or if you have an existing VMware world that you wanted to continue to manage, you can be managing it from HPE's cloud, GreenLake, and be managing your VMware world. Or you can be having a split world where you have some of a cluster running HPE's hypervisor and another one running, let's for instance, VMware. And this may be a transition phase for you. So I wanted to put those in here because the point of this is that on-prem is always an option alongside of your cloud. You can integrate existing hardware with either the HPE GreenLake solution or with some of the Azure locals if you have validated systems already, or you can be implementing this as new. But if you need to keep resources local for performance or whatever reason, that is always going to be an option for you. So that hybrid environment of on-prem and cloud, which is very common, as Chris had mentioned earlier, adds to the flexibility that you have in your design. Security and compliance is another decision criteria we want to consider. By default, the Azure world is built in a multi-layered security environment dealing with networking and security and identity. And we just finished a series of webinars on Azure security, each one looking at different components of this, on networking, on storage, and identity. In the networking is where we talked about Azure firewalls and VNet peering, hub and spoke designs, route groups, things like that. In the storage webinar, we talked about authentication to your storage and encryption at rest and in transit, key management, whether it's service-oriented or user-oriented. So all of those things are available to take a closer look at if you need to take a look at what kind of security is available out there. With identity security, we talked about the Entra ID that sits behind your Azure world, the role-based access controls and MFA, conditional access, all of that. The point is it's configured by, there's a level of security, what I wanted to get out today, there's a level of security that is turned on by default in your environment. And there's other webinars can give you more information about how you can tailor that security to even more meet what your requirements are. The Azure world is built onto global standards like ISO and GDPR and HIPAA and things like that. So if you have those kinds of requirements, the Azure platform is there already with the built to support those. Conditional access is built into it because it's all backed by Entra ID. So we can monitor or not monitor, we can filter access to your resources through determining whether your devices are compliant or not, whether the sign-in is a risk, meaning it's coming from potentially an unknown location or an impossible travel location, a user risk, meaning that identity has been seen in places like the dark web and has a risk associated with it now. So we have all these things that we can now add to the security that would filter access to our resources. The other one I wanted to bring up, and this one I think is a great tool that I don't know that gets enough attention, and that's the Azure Advisor. The biggest problem with security is we don't know what needs done. You may have some ideas, but you may not know exactly all where you can improve, not only costs, but security and performance and things like that. And that's what the Azure Advisor does. It gives you visibility into your world so that you can get recommendations on how to improve your cost management, any recommendations on security, any recommendations on fault tolerance or issues that you may be having that you need to address. Every one of the things that would list to you, and I don't have a screenshot of the next page you would get, would take you to information about what it's talking about and also offer you a path to start implementing. So if one of the recommendations in security is you don't have some form of authentication turned on, the link will take you to where you can turn on and will tell you what the ramifications of turning it on will be. So now you have knowledge that you may not have had before about your world, not just about security, but cost and performance and resiliency and all of these other things. So Azure Advisor is a powerful tool that should be used a lot. Now, Office 365 has a similar tool as well. It's called Secure Score that does that exact same thing. So that's something that the cloud will give you. Another decision criteria is your business continuity and disaster recovery. So all of the Azure World storage is redundant by default. You always get 3 copies of your data. A zone is a data center within a region. So if I want my 3 copies of my storage in different data centers, I can choose a zone redundant storage, and 1 copy will be in one data center, another will be in another data center, all within the same region, and I'll get some data center level failure protections. I can do this with virtual machines and other things as well. That Microsoft offers local and regional load balancers, so I can spread my resources across multiple regions and present it to users as one device, so that if even a region went down, I still have resources being offered to users. Azure Backup. When you put your resources up into the cloud, Azure Backup is a backup solution that is offered to you within the Microsoft suite. Third-party tools could also be used if you wanted. If you're a Veeam person, for example, it can back up Azure to their cloud as well. But the Azure Backup Storage is geo-replicated by default and can reach not only Azure resources, but it can reach down to on-premises resources as well. Azure Site Recovery, which is a tool that works not just region to region in an Azure world, but it's an on-prem to cloud. So if you're staying on-prem for now, but you need a DR site, Azure Site Recovery can replicate your world up into Azure and keep them in sync. And it provides these scripted failovers that will bring up what needs to be brought up in a failover timeframe in the order in which they need to be brought up, and will, if it's a test, will leave your production world alone or potentially shut down the on-prem world. But the site recovery allows you to have failover across regions, where maybe you don't want to have 2 active regions for which you're paying for servers running. You want an active and a passive. You can use site recovery to keep those 2 worlds synchronized and just fail to the other region when you're ready to go. These are things that you need. Do I need disaster recovery? Do I need business continuity more than what I have on-prem? These are some of the things that Azure could offer that may entice you to consider to move that direction or add to your on-prem world. Modernization of legacy systems. So to move from an on-prem world that may be starting to get dated, you can start all the way at the beginning here at the simplest way of rehosting them, lift and shift, and take these servers that may still be old, maybe on old hardware, and just move them to the cloud so that they're running on the Azure's newer hardware that they have. Maybe your operating systems are fine, it's the hardware that's too old. So we just lift and shift that up to the cloud as is, no functional changes. It's just now going to live in Azure. You can consider replatforming. So instead of putting a Windows server with SQL on it, maybe you use a SQL managed instance. Instead of putting a Windows server with a file share on it, maybe you use Azure Files. We did a webinar on this as well a while back. I think it was entitled Servers to Services, that talk about what platform as a service things that Azure offers that I can now change to a more serverless environment and just start taking the advantage of the capacities and the resources available in the cloud without being maybe potentially constrained by the server itself that I've decided to put up there. You can refactor, which means I'm going to be modifying codes to be more cloud native, maybe using Kubernetes or Azure Functions. You can re-architect. So instead of using one big app, potentially you might be able to use some of these more microservices in Azure to automate workflows and things like that. So you're now, what we've gone is from rehosting, which is the same technology just up in the cloud, to now we're starting to change over to a different technology, different way of doing business, if you will. And of course, you can always replace by moving over to SaaS solutions, like the Dynamics or the Power Platforms and things like that, and just get rid of servers altogether, and anything that you would need to manage below the application in the stack. All right, so these are the ways you can move to a more modern platform. And if your business is being constrained by legacy systems, the cloud now offers you other ways of doing things, and these would be some of your decision criteria. Now, I want to kind of pause right here, and I'm going to say something. I'm going to say this again later. One of the things we're going to talk about is, evaluating what a migration might look like. Part of understanding what a migration might look like is to understand what your target environment is going to be. So a lot of people say, well, what does it take to move myself to the cloud? And the only thing I could ever answer to you in the very first time we talked is to be thinking along the lines of lift and shift, because that's all I would, that's the only known I have. But if we start looking at redesign, now that may change the way we do our migrations. We may be doing more application-oriented migrations as opposed to server-based migrations. And these newer technologies, which Microsoft develops into the cloud first and maybe only, are now available for you to use. So that's a decision criteria you might want to use. Improving your performance and reliability, similar to disaster recovery and business continuity. This is more along the lines of being able to scale, being able to be on updated hardware that you don't have to manage, because it will just stay up on updated hardware because it's in the Azure data center. It also, the Azure world is built around 99.99 virtual uptime SLAs. So this is the SLA table that Microsoft has, and some times of what that is. So they're giving you a SLA that their system will be available in these numbers for the various different resources. So compare, you are now having to decide, well, can I reach these kinds of numbers on-prem? Do I need these kinds of numbers? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But if you need to improve your SLA into your own business, maybe moving to the cloud gives you that better platform, because in order to achieve these SLAs, Microsoft is relying on replication and multiple copies, which may be expensive for you to do the same in your own world. Data and analytics capabilities. Maybe you just need the power of the cloud and the tools to start dealing with SQL warehousing and data warehousing, the Power BI, AI. Maybe you're now moving into the AI world and starting to develop things in AI. You just need the power. This is where the cloud will shine, because it will be there on demand. So if you're dealing with machine learning or cognitive services or Databricks or bot services or anything like that, they're there, and you don't need to build the world to support AI. It's there already. You just want to use it. So there's a decision criteria. Do you need resources that you can't build on-prem or don't want to build on-prem? Okay. Integration with the Microsoft ecosystem. So the Azure cloud, if you're already in Office 365, the natural move for moving your platform as a service, your other resources, compute, storage, things like that, is to move over toward an Azure subscription so that you could use Entra ID for authentication as well. For many businesses that we deal with, the Azure subscription is using the same Entra ID as Microsoft 365 subscription. They're off, where their email is and all. They don't have to. You can open an independent subscription with a separate Entra ID if you need to. But for many of the smaller businesses and even mid-size, this is an attractive thing, because now the same accounts that I use to read email can be granted permissions to do things over into the Azure world. So between directory synchronization between your AD and Entra ID, you have your accounts available there between on-premise and the cloud. They're the same. Using Azure Domain Services would bring up an Active Directory world into your Entra ID. That will allow you to access Active Directory requirements for authentication and resources as well. So there's that integration. There's support for hybrid cloud and multi-cloud strategies. So this is where your Azure Arc comes into play again, because the Azure Arc can reach out beyond just on-prem. It can reach into other clouds to manage and get telemetry on. Azure Monitor can reach into the AWS worlds and the GCP worlds and get telemetry and let you know how things are running. So I can now, through a single pane of glass, look across multiple clouds now. So now my cloud strategy doesn't have to just be Azure. It can be multiple clouds, and I'll still get some visibility into it. Defender for cloud goes across multiple clouds. So I can put the Defender connectors into other clouds and have management of those devices and protection of those devices, and even cost management, at least across AWS. So I can do some cost management. So the Azure world, as think of it as the central hub, can reach out into other clouds and manage them as well. So when you're thinking about, am I ready to move to the cloud, you're not necessarily locked to say, if I want, do I have to use Azure and Azure alone? The answer is no. You may find it easier because these tools, though they do reach in, they don't reach in with as many features as they do in Azure. But if AWS is where you have storage that you need to manage, you don't want to move it, well, we'll just integrate the two, because maybe we'll put other resources in Azure and leave that storage in AWS. Or maybe AWS is the platform that you want to use for certain resources just to keep some separation. You don't get locked to one. And so again, what Amazon's world would do is we'd build this connector between the world, and its agents will talk to its resources, sending that information over to the logs analytic databases in Azure, for which Azure Monitor can do its work. So there is this integration with these other systems where I can get the information I need. And then migration tools. How am I going to migrate? Again, a lot depends on, am I doing a lift and shift, or am I changing, am I replatforming along the way, or am I changing to a more modern technology? But if I'm doing more of a lift and shift, there's an Azure Migrate tool that will just take your VMs as is and move them to the cloud. There are also many third-party tools doing the same thing that may offer features that you would prefer that Azure Migrate may not. So you can evaluate those, but there are tools. Now, even when you're moving to a replatforming of something, look at your migration tools as well. That may tell you what order in which you need to do things and what that cost of migration may be, because you're going to have to purchase the tools. Azure Migrate is free. Third-party tools, naturally, are not. You just need to understand the benefits of each one to see if they're worth it. So, how do I evaluate my requirements? What are my requirements when I'm building something into a cloud, or whether I need to decide whether I need to move to the cloud? And the very first thing is your current system putting any constraints on your business now? Are you missing opportunities? Are you not able to react quick enough? Are you not able to react on scale quick enough? Are you getting too much downtime on-prem? Is your performance not there? What's holding you back? What's your pain points that you want to address by either upgrading on-prem or moving to the cloud? So first, understand those. Now, the missed opportunities is a tough one. So this isn't just looking at your downtime. This is, looking at business processes, and does my IT support my business processes? And then you have, and from there, you're going to try to figure out where I possibly missed some opportunities. Unfortunately, you may not, that's not going to be 100% because you don't know what you don't know on some of those. Here's one that gets missed a lot, and I'm going to that's why I put it as a bullet point. Define what you're trying to solve. What do you want to solve, not only in the near term, but what do you want to solve in the long term? And then what are those prerequisites for the long term? Because that may determine how you're moving in the near term. What are you looking for payback in the near term and long term? Let's know what we're shooting for so that we know that this migration is actually improving your business tools and meeting the pain, eliminating the pain points and accomplishing maybe the new features that you want. You need to know what you're trying to do. Sometimes the biggest factor in the decision is pure cost. You just need to get off of hardware. Maybe you want to get off of VMware because of pricing and things like that, and that's fine. But in a migration, this is now your opportunity to be considering other options. I have another slide on this, but I'm going to say it right now. In any migration, moving as is always a valid first step. Just get off-prem if you know you're going to the cloud, and worry about restructuring once you're up in the cloud. So you don't have to have all the I's dotted and T's crossed before you make the first move, especially if you're in a position where you need to move quickly because your equipment's gone end of life or your licensings are about to renew and you just want to get off for now. As-is migrations are a wonderful way to get you off, buy you the time you need now to start redeveloping your business model and your IT structure to support that. Right? So identify your business requirements. What regulatory requirements do you need to meet? What about data sovereignty? Does your data need to stay within the country or within a particular region? This is where the on-prem may come back into play. Does your data need to stay on-prem for any reason? So know what your requirements are in your businesses, what the business requires just legally and things like that. That's part of the equation as well. So you also want to be looking at what features and performance, this is just raw looking at my numbers, how much I have a VMware cluster, for instance, how much CPU am I really using right now? How much storage am I really using right now? How much bandwidth am I really using right now talking to it? So I know what I need to build up into the world, into the new world. Do I have automation and reporting now that I need to move up into the cloud or modify in some way so I still get the same reports and automations? Network security. In the cloud, you're just building another data center. So whatever your requirements are for network isolation, what kind of firewalls you want to use, not just the Azure firewalls, but third-party firewalls. You can Fortinet and Cisco, Meraki's, and things like that are all available as virtual appliances up in Azure. So let's say, for example, you are a Meraki shop and you have that in all of your offices. When you go to the cloud, it can be a Meraki firewall as well. So whatever your infrastructure requirements are for segregations and things like that, know them. So when we go to the cloud, we're building the same, or maybe we're going to build them better this time because maybe you didn't isolate so well on-prem, because you went from a small shop that didn't need it to a big shop and you grew so rapidly you didn't have time to restructure things. Happens. What kind of connectivity do you need between Azure and the on-prem world, Azure and the end user world? Do you need a dedicated connection, a VPN connection? Do your end users need VPN connections, either to on-prem or to the cloud, or where do you need them? What kind of authentication do you need? What kind of integration with AD and SaaS applications? Entra ID offers single sign-on between it and many SaaS applications using, the typical SSO, SAML authentications and things like that. So, what kind of security do you need there to reach out to all the sites where your data is? Do you have a skill set to manage and migrate? In other words, is your team ready? Do you have these skills in-house? Will training be sufficient, or do you need to augment? Typically, you need to augment during a migration because your staff is probably busy enough just doing day-to-day stuff that trying to get a migration done at the same time is just a difficult task. But look at your skill sets to make sure you're ready to move to the cloud. Training is always recommended, just so you know how to use the management tools. All right, so am I ready to move to the cloud? Everything has to start with a very good inventory of what you have now. I stress that because when it's over the years, you just get used to what you have and you almost forget how things work as far as what server's dependent on what app, et cetera, et cetera. So you need to have a good inventory of your server and networking hardware, what softwares you had, are renewals coming up, are end of life dates coming up, because this may influence the migration schedule to deal with things that are going to time out on us quickly. and then we move on to other things, because that will adjust the cost of what this migration will look like, because we're going to have to do things in an order dictated by potentially some end of life requirements. Document dependencies, know what talks to what, so that we don't separate them and cause performance issues unknowingly. So just know how data and apps associate. Determine if you have what you have now, if what you have now is Azure compatible as is, that we could do a lift and shift, because that could buy us time. What apps require high-speed access to data? So this will determine what kind of internet connection you need. Maybe you need a dedicated connection. Maybe you need to move the client piece close to the data at the same time you're moving the data itself. And also know if there's known errors we need to address along the way. So make sure we're correcting those. So know what you have, because that will also determine or influence potentially the design we're going to build and the order in which we're going to migrate, and possibly the tools we're going to use to migrate. Know your internet and WAN connectivity, know where your users are, know where your resources are, know what bandwidth is required for you, how fault tolerant it needs to be. Now, the general recommendation is when you move to the cloud, you want more than one connection there in case your internet connection goes down. So if you are working from a corporate office with your data up in Azure, it is best practice to have 2 internet connections with different vendors so that you have protection against the failure of one to another. You can use load balance, you can use active passive, something, but it's best practice to have multiples, because that is your connection to your data center now. Your data center node is no longer local to you. Okay. Do you have contractual constraints? Like, do you have a colo? Maybe like you have servers and Expedient, for example, and that contract is up in, this is much like an end of life decision with software and hardware. You know, is there a contractual agreement that you need to either move by, or you have, which, if you miss that, you're forced to renew again. Do you have a managed service provider? Do they have the skill set to manage you up into Azure as well, or any other cloud that you're going to move to? So understand your contractual constraints. Does that change your pricing if your machines move there and someone else is still management? So know that as well. What is your company's downtime tolerance for migration? That will kind of help us decide whether we can go a quick big bang approach, or whether we have to take a little slower approach that eliminates downtime. So that will determine some of the cost of the migration itself. What tools are you going to use to assess your environment? Azure Migrate offers tools, whether you're going to use them or not. It has a discover and an assessment feature that says, here's what I see in your environment. Here's the resources that it's using. Here are the recommended Azure VMs I would build to support that world. So now you can get a cost on what that world would look like. I will tell you through experience, just bump those machine numbers up a little bit, but at least you know what the minimums are, because that's what it's going to give you. It's going to give you the minimums, and you're going to want a little more than that. But it will tell you a little bit about your environment and what the cost of moving those virtual machines, for instance, would be moving up to the cloud. All right. Azure Site Recovery, much the same thing, because those Azure Migrate and Azure Site Recovery work together. They're, in fact, Azure Site Recovery uses features out of Azure Migrate to do its thing. It also has an assessment aspect as well, so it'll give you an idea of what you have and what it might look like in environments, especially in the lift and shift worlds. There are also third-party tools, and I just threw a couple of them on here. The and more is what you want to focus on there and look at tools. There are tools out there that are just designed to assess. There are tools that are out there to assess and automate. And there's tools out there to help you with understanding costs. Now, you pay for them, but if you have a complex environment, you may need tools like that, because everything I've talked about so far takes a little time to figure out. So maybe a tool will help you do that, and it'd be cheaper to buy the tool than for you to spend the hours it would require to find these things on your own sometimes. So maybe consider using a tool to see what your readiness looks like and what the Azure world might look like as well. Estimating costs. Okay, here's the challenge that you're going to have. First of all, Comparing CapEx and OpEx is a little difficult. A lot depends on how your company likes to write things off over time. That's going to come into play. Whether you would prefer to have a monthly bill or whether you prefer to just pay once and let it run. There are a lot of companies on-prem who don't have a lot of high compute requirements that will buy hardware and then can let that life cycle run quite a while before they refresh again. So they get a long life out of their server. So CapEx makes a lot of sense to them to be on-prem because they're going to keep their hardware because their demand isn't enough to require newer and newer equipment frequently. Know your actual use patterns. How much, when is your data being used? What is the bandwidth that's being drawn? Who's accessing the data? And is it applications running automation? Is it users interacting? Where are your users? Know where your data is transferring between client and server so you know what that bandwidth might look like. Consider operational costs and other indirect costs as well. This is your MSP cost. This is your data center cost, heating, cooling, space, et cetera, et cetera. Staffing costs. Do you need to get different staff? Do you need to train staff? So how much is this going to cost? Well, we need to answer some of these questions as well. That knowing your actual use patterns, that's going to come back again in a minute here. You'll see where I'll talk about that again. From there, then you need to first know your total cost of ownership of what you have now, so that you know whether it's beneficial or not to move to the cloud. So you need to know what your cost of ownership is right now. Microsoft provides some guidance at that URL, and again, you're going to get the slides. So I thought I left that in full text mode so you can get there and follow through all the recommendations they make to try to figure out what your total on-premises cost will be. What is the Azure world cost? Well, a quick and simple tool is the Azure pricing calculator that you can use. Just Google that and it will pop up for you, and you put in your resources and it will tell you what it would cost. So what machine model, how much storage, how much bandwidth will go in and out. And so you kind of fill in some parameters and it says, okay, that's going to be X dollars a month. How many of those machines do you need? Oh, you need a VPN gateway, so you put that resource in, and it's building you an estimate, if you will, a rough estimate, for which you can export out into a spreadsheet and get an idea of what the Azure world will look like. That said, tips. You need to know your usage pattern. What are your peaks and what is your average load? Because you may need to build your Azure world to handle the peak and not just your average use. If those servers remain spinning all the time, you're paying for them even when they're not in full utilization. This is where things like scale sets, are helpful if your application is conducive to them, where machines will be spun up as needed and will be spun down when not needed. But know when they are, whether it's a peak in the day, whether it's a seasonal spike, etc. Choose the right region. Prices may vary by region and locations. Not all resources are available in all regions. So know what you need to have up in Azure and know where the regions are and are they close to where your users are. Factor in networking costs. Data, you pay for data egress in Azure, so know where users are making connections from and how much data is actually flowing. That's not a huge part of the cost, but it can be a bit surprising at times. Consider hybrid benefits when you're pricing things out. If you have licenses that you want to use for the Windows servers that you may be putting up there, you can bring your licensing up and not pay for licensing on the Azure VM. The typical cost of an Azure, if you left everything at default, is you're paying. It's going to give you the cost for the machine and the Windows licensing. If you can eliminate the Windows licensing, that cost on that machine is clearly less, and you're going to use your licensing up there. So look to see if you have some of those hybrid benefits, and that will give you a more accurate estimate. All right, and then plan for growth when you're doing this. So don't build, like I talked about with the Azure Migrate, don't take the minimums they're saying you need, buffer some things so you can so you have room for growth without having to reconfigure your virtual machines. That said, quick sidebar here. If you find you need more horsepower in VM, you can change your models fairly quick. All right. So get real world data to validate your calculations. A pilot project is very helpful for you to better understand what your Azure world will look like. So if you can put some non-mission critical things up in Azure first, just to get a feel for how it is, what the management might look like. Do I have the skill sets? Does it perform as I want? Get that information, and it may help you estimate the cost for a full move if you needed to. Do not assume there will be cost savings. You are actually just looking for an environment that better supports your business. And you may be implementing new technologies to better support your business. And that may cost more because you're putting in more fault tolerance, more DR, new technology altogether, but your business will benefit from that. So don't just look for cost savings. So real quick, the decision criteria we talked about, that's the list of it there. I don't want to rehash that for you, but start with total cost of ownership. Flexibility, I do want to point out that scalability, flexibility. Flexibility is probably one of the biggest advantages of moving to the cloud, because it is pre-built for you and you just need to take advantage of it, subscribe to resources, and integrate it into your environment. There's no building of anything. And when you're done with something, you just shut it down, and there's no more cost to it. It's not like you have unused hardware costs sitting around for another year or so, that you just didn't use. Security and compliance is typically easier and can be better up in the cloud than what most people have built on-prem. So that's just something to consider. So those are the things we just talked about as far as the decision criteria. When we talked about evaluating your requirements, these are the pieces we talked about again. Know your pain points, know your objectives. Those are the big things that I find that most people are fuzzy on. So if you have a good idea what you want, we can get a migration plan together that moves you there without unnecessary steps. And then assessing your readiness, make sure you have a good inventory. And again, people are fuzzy there, so I'm just emphasizing that. So as far as estimating costs, again, the challenge is the whole CapEx, OpEx, what is my real use of things, et cetera. It's best to know your real world uses before you try to estimate prices, because you may be looking at your world today when it's in a standard operating state, but not be considering peak. And so you may under-resource things. So just know what your real world is like before you start estimating. And again, I'm going to say it again, do not assume that there's going to be a cost savings. You are looking for an environment that better supports your business. All right, so what I will say, these are a lot of complex questions. Some of the things I just want to bring up on the screen while I'm talking. There are some training classes that you might want to consider as you're preparing for this or getting ready to operate. But I also would want to just throw out there, we have done this several times. A whiteboard session with you to just discuss your world initially at a high level, and kind of get a feel for what that might look like moving to the cloud, what's valid or what is valid as a cloud's resource, what might not be. That may be beneficial to you, at least if nothing more, to get you thinking about what you might need to figure out or define better. So consider that. And with that, we're just going to move to the Q&A with, I think we have like a minute or so left, but Chris, is there anything you want to pop up here real quick before we leave?
Yeah, so the major questions that had come in did revolve around, some cost stuff, or also just how do I, not just the cost of running Azure, but also kind of the cost of migrating to it. So I think you probably touched on that. So I'll just kind of underscore a couple things. You talked about the whiteboard session for kind of, let's just sit back and there's no charge for that when we do that with you, to look at the system. If they need something more in depth, that could be kind of a design assessment sort of thing.
But I would start with as you said, I'd kind of echo to say we're starting with a whiteboard session. So in the survey that each of you will get after the session today, there's a couple different whiteboard sessions that are offered in there. Again, there's no charge for these, so if you're interested, just note that on your survey. One's if you're just trying to figure out, do I want to go to Azure, stay on-prem, stay on hybrid? Another would be more focused towards the whole migration process. How do I kind of get there? So we can talk about that. There's also some options for finding out more about sizing and cost estimates for usage of Azure, some of the HP resources, as well as obviously some of the training stuff. So lots of good resources there. Dave, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate everyone's attention to this information. Lots of good stuff here, and we'll give you back the remainder of your afternoon. Thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate it.